Dear humanity, we are and have been in a semi-ancient syntax trap. Science reveals this. And so it is important to understand the identity of the identity /s of positive. How positive has one identity of volume /s. Where it has, for example, how you have a cell nucleus, cell body, cell wall. That makes up the identity of a cell. In relationship to what we have to communicate about. Where and how we are an increasing identity of volume as value, as nature /nature as value. Where there's two distinct identities of sequence /simultaneous nature. This is about where it will only stay positive onto itself and as itself, anywhere anything is. All exceptions in exception nature are in demonstration of it. Every single modern nation's acceptation of fact treatments and of positive and negative treatments cannot defend that, and their style of defending that, without self-valuing criminally foreign influenced premises, criminally foreign influenced statutes and precedents, but also criminally foreign influenced sequence true, order of the finite, value of the order of the finite true, value of what is order of the active true, the value of what is progressive true, the value of our progressive value. For example, people stacking. We have to, and simultaneously, so we have victim industries that were originally and still are maintained victim predators in relationship to this syntax trap. Because now we have fact treatment nature roles with that. Positive and negative treatment roles as criminal insidiousness natures that were propagated by a breaching organized crime method using human fact treatment nature. We are in a syntax trap that came from semi-ancient times that figured out a way it could trick the entire species identity of volume to stay self-valued roles with and as identities of the phenomena of grounded groups of the species identity of volume, whatever they want to call them, nations, countries, territories, all locations, areas, and states of the entire species identity of volume is fact treatment nature sick. And that's maintained self-value by a predicate delivery system method. We're obligated to call an archetypal or organized crime method. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a police form, not a criminal. It is evidence originally and still how lawyers had simultaneously, because of two, positive and negative. We're going to talk about aggression, their treatments of and uses of words /values, all, like emotions, like passions. Every even the finest detail, has 2 points of real possession on both sides of it that are distinct from the rest of the complete identity of volume that we are, as that shared identity of volume individually grouped and together. See, what is going to be positive to those three simultaneously? When they are simultaneously, it's an individual first, finite first. Then while it is simultaneous, when it is simultaneous, because that's how the system works that shows us its identity as the simultaneous nature. The only identity that is simultaneously in relationship to all locations at once. No matter where you are, who you are, where you go. There is one identity of value /value progression that inventions are going to work or not in relationship to itself. And no one invented it. And inventions are further positive or negative in relationship to itself. And no one invented it. So we had like the obligations where the ancients had just naturally revealed before criminally foreign influenced again, collusion with as victims with one predicate acts delivery system method that forced roles, so therefore forced juxtaposed other natures of organized crime. And of what? That is worse than war crimes simultaneously. Of what? All difference, fake size police, that was all used remotely. Incapable of defending that and of affording free speech that is not propagated exploitation of the forced speech on the short words and the long words of everyone, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously. Everyone. Now, what, who, what, and who, of what nature, no matter how powerful you are as a leader, since semi-ancient times, since latter semi-ancient times, if you're going to be a leader, you're going to have, it's going to be over criminally foreign influence locations, areas, states, premises treatments. Nothing to do with anything, where, how we are, this identity of volume science. You see, but it has to pretend other. And so, to all locations, areas, states, as them. This is how they are used remotely here and there. Why and how they know they have to counter overt criminal enterprises. And all that is sick within hundreds of nations at once. Shared where the only peace in relationship to that is in collusion, distinctly, to keep out not distinctly, even undiscerned by them and self-valued. All victims of this predicate acts delivery system method, so then they become identities of law, identities of titles. And so then they want, they're victims still, sustained, since they were each age of correlation nature, each individual. Now, they have, World Trade Center and other nations equivalent. See, but the way New York unfolded, Hartford, Connecticut, right between New York and Boston, is recorded, confessed, and demonstrated involved with Wethersfield interbranch, intercities through time, roles with a vertical and horizontal database organized crime method. What's that mean, vertical and horizontal? Means live progressions. Excuse me. Live progressions. They have to hide from and hurt. Correlation, which I mean hide from. They have to pretend not to understand people. Values stacked. Reactions to uses of all identity of the ground locations by a predicate acts delivery system method that causes negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures for the value of reactions to them that originally and still blamed on other things, others, and selves, the real causes of those negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. Acts like predicate acts. The whole methods of them are recorded. That they were preventing free speech, preventing mandated law to do it. They're using tactics, forging names and switching names, the executive branch and the judicial branch, sickly distinctly, and sickly non-distinctly, in other words, individually and grouped. This is because of how they are used remotely. This is here, kept the outcome here and there by nations here and there that were forged together with some Washington, D.C., and World Trade Center roles with this syntax trap. So they have hundreds of nations that share already roles with fabrication, audio, video in cases. As their roles with the Justice Department, for example, private, like doctors. Also, now these are various natures of courts, and of their family members kept victims sickly, distinctly, and non-distinctly as the executive branch, but kept victim predators, because their motivations are also relevant to their roles with furthering what hurt them, as their roles further with recorded abuses of kids, and roles and involvements with school resource officers, intercities, on and off the news media too. His roles with agencies and agents and with other nations that make conspiracy theories, where they're involved with the syntax predator roles as victim predators per uses of our identities, all individuals A through Z. Further, just differentially, the branches of government and all tied to them privately. There are people associated with Sandy Hook, Connecticut, Newtown, that are involved with vertical and horizontal database organized crime, acts, and methods. But see, this involves the courts too, so they shut people up because they're pretending it's for legitimate reasons. It's tied to a whole bunch of people, tied to a house on the corner where the bridge, I forgot the name of the bridge, that comes into Wethersfield. There's Eric Oliveri and a Craig Oliveri, and a whole bunch of people associated with them that were used that are in roles with Wethersfield Interbranch and former director of the F.B.I, Robert Luskin, and his lawyer, and federal criminal co-defendants of his, who are involved with juxtaposed natures of identity thefts and frauds that are relevant in methods and sequence shifts and fabricating audio and video roles with little kids, attaching little kids to fake locations, fake natures of ties to people, fake ties to people that are completely. Like a Joshua Julian, further confessed recording demonstrated they have our agencies and courts associated with them, and for other nations involved with programs with kids, sickly, uses of their interbranch locations and crime methods, fabricating audio and video, and uses of the vertical and horizontal database predicate acts facilitated for that, and on and off those locations, as women associated with Trinity College from my town who are strangers, who I only know in context real briefly, who made confessions to me about this up front, and they're involved with sequence shifts, attaching me to fake locations, and that is the people tying me to fake people I don't even know. This is so many ways that like with various natures of courts, their family members, like people associated with all the intercampuses. There are a whole bunch of people in the Delafair family that are recorded involved with judges that are involved, a whole bunch of men involved with girls they all share, and that with fire departments involved, also AT&T, where they use sense and sensibilities and identities of jobs and identity ground locations remotely, but through a predicate acts delivery system that keeps that the outcome /s. Now, so by preventing people short words, they keep what is intersickly distinctly victims all ages and natures of campuses. Sickly, non-distinctly. They keep that from being discerned because how it is methodically maintained, self-valued, propagated, sickly, non-distinctly against all identity ground locations and campuses further, and sciences further, and databases, relationships further. Know how we have all those jobs. You could just breach screen through that, through all these other motivations. That's not their job. We're trained to do this because we're this type of expert. See, then we have types of excerpts, types of reactions. It's a breaching screen. It's a breaching tool, weapon, worse. So they have the method and natures of communications that prevent the short words and demonstration of uses of Wethersfield, Rocky Hill campuses, Hartford campuses, New Britain campuses, of children campuses, per the people involved with intermilitary, now there were a whole bunch of foreign and domestic medical families associated with like military families and F.B.I. families and people associated with medical organized crime and identity thefts and frauds that are relevant to what's going on here with the breaching movement, and where they're preventing mandated law and evidence. That's evidence because they have roles with the interbranch reliant upon statutes of precedence influenced by their them recorded all these methods of fabricating audio and video into databases. Increasingly, this has kept the outcome, because before the people we have of sophistication now, as old as they may be, since before they were born, other nations were already perfected uses of rolls with what Americans A through Z were rolls with, blaming on other things other than themselves, what the predicate acts delivery system method maintains. This which kept and keeps overt criminal enterprises kept needing to hide the same finite sequence shifts with them finite lies, order the finite lies, active lies, order the active lies, order the value of the order of the active lies, progressive lies, order of progressive lies, or value of the order of progressive lies. Like, for example, the people stacking, the infrastructure that holds people in New York City. That was built by a predicate acts delivery system, as much as it was built by the people physically who took part of it as victims that would then defend how they are victims wrong, and through fact-cheaping nature differences with other people already employed as styles that can't defend that, and us from what exploits every modern nation individually grouped and together. So, and through this method that keeps that self-value, because no one can fathom until they can see through that, because they don't follow mandated law. And so their excuse is they self-value all the vertical and horizontal predicate acts. So there are people on Trinity College and associated with Trinity College and with CCSU that confessed and recorded have connections and roles with former director of the F.B.I. Robert Luskin, and with federal criminals and people on the child sex offender registry associated with them in Weathersfield interbranch locations, intercities also interbranch locations, fabricating audio and video, pretending they don't realize things were proven in courts. And because in other words, we had corruption of everyone distinctly to keep how corruption of, but to keep how the method of the lie progressions and the things needed, the illusions needed by the predicate acts delivery system method to be maintained, screened, blamed on, not discerned in conjunction to it, which is invisible but still discernible. Just as conjunction between an identity as a predicate and identity as a subject. They're invisible but still discernible. The identity between them. Not just the sentence, but not just the sentence identity of relation to itself. Every identity of volume, no matter how finite, no matter how big, all of them together, everything together, existence is a semi-nature relationship to the identity of volume that what is at least the identity of the body of forever is, per science. An increasing identity of volume. Only the extent of it is debatable. So we have, since semi-ancient times, a syntax trap, and that had to pretend other. So it built all locations, areas, and states with self-valued criminal ceaseless nature's roles, like all the identities of one body, semi-nature relationship to one identity of negative value nature progression, self-value. This knew that would be self-valued, and that would perpetually be only capable of being valuing her correlation nature, each age of it simultaneously, are separated from our actually discernible, inherent active and progressive means. Again, with two identities of sequence/simultaneous nature beyond our control, but one way. Now they also have control in words like power, used with physical delusions simultaneously with criminally foreign influence premises treatments and sequence treatments and identity treatments. Everyone, sickly distinctly, including our branches of government, individually grouped in together, sickly distinctly, and that is used remotely, leading up to the World Trade Center and since. So, but we have already our identities of counters to things like predicate. Know how the predicate of English and how the predicate act of the law share an identity, because the sciences share an identity. Everything shares this identity that inventions work or not in relationship to it. Its identity of relationship to itself. They are further positive or not in relationship to its identity of itself, and the value of that increasing. So note how a criminal insidiousness nature, which would be associated with a predicate act, with committing a predicate act. This would be as a criminal insidiousness nature. I'm not a lawyer. That lawyers originally and still they had roles with fake sides of correlation nature, fake alternatives, per the breaching method, per the predicate acts delivery system method. We're going to refer to it as an archetypal criminal enterprise. So we're also going to use as evidence is transition from Alka to Rico is associated with people also with forensic locations and associated with body dumping spots they had with the agencies, with directors associated since founding, pounding drums, incapable of defending their fact treatments, premises treatments, and ourselves at the same time. This again per a breaching method where they also had to share policing with other nations, and that same thing there as victims. So they pretend to perceive statement, like in other words, they use verbal aggression and identity thefts, interbranch locations, and they have the media steal us to fake words because they have employed as victims. But this is how they use them as victim predators, because they have them one narrative. Oh, you're going to pretend passions and emotions. You do this because this is the way the audience likes it. So you have to, otherwise you're a little crazy, because we have so much bad news, and then you'll have to mix in some good because So they're backed in as victims, doing what is unnatural, which would be okay, but that unnatural is also being exploited by the interbranch victim reactions, which would be okay, but that was already exploited by it, and in other words, they didn't understand. They hid that, and that's still it would be okay still, because they're still this is since they were kids. Each individual, each identity of correlation nature is actually inherent, active, and progressive means. What slavery is about, what Jim Crow laws are about, is fake sides and fake alternatives. As victims, victim affect nature, victim fact treatment nature that couldn't defend itself then and can't defend its explanations of it now without pretending passions and emotions, and not in relationship to, and only to obfuscate the five bonded by one distinct identities of positive as sequence nature / simultaneously simultaneous nature. So 1/3/5 identities of volume as that one, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously itself, which is in demonstration of the value of its identity's relationship to itself, and the value of that increasing simultaneously, where value is nature and nature is value, and one value, that identity of volume's identity, its identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that is what is in demonstration to us of what is self-generating. What is at least the identity of the body of forever. And we are obligated to have an integrity of and a quality of fact-treatment nature capable of countering and not blaming. So when you have to counter predicate acts and criminal insidiousness natures and criminal foreign influences, which are organized crime terms, in relationship to this which is not sourced by one other nation. There are hundreds of nations here or there shared too, and all private with that. And so all identity ground locations know, and further inter-campuses and further inter-databases. This is, and also, see, this is roles with what Captain keeps their patients and criminals needing to hide the same sequence shifts, finite, active, and progressive lies with them. Identity thefts and frauds lies with them. Their roles attaching people to fake locations, fake sequence relationships to others. That's so there are 3 locations at the end of the Brown Turnpike before the heart of Hartford, of Connecticut, which is down the street from Trinity College. Now, those 3 locations are involved with a whole bunch of people involved with identity theft, frauds, and worse than war crimes. With a Soto family, I don't know them. And with a whole bunch of people with Trinity College and CCSU involved, predicate acts as victims from off the campuses. And now they have sequence shifts involved with that too, where they have the passions and emotions of people committing sequence shifts with locations because the interbranch have been fabricating audio and video because they've been maintained criminally foreign influence in cases already. They have to hide from and keep fabricating audio and video to cover over what's actually recorded. And so they have roles with identity thefts through motivations that are real, motivations for evil that are real. But it is not the subject, which is the predicate acts delivery system method, which involves the actual acts as subject. But it is just it's juxtaposed with the order to it and with the methods. Like, so they have a whole bunch of methods. They have judges like a Judge Killian who recorded with a judge with doctors, foreign and domestic, involved with Facebook rape threats with people on the child sex offender registry, and further associated with their patients and criminals with a principal child offenders campus, and preventing people from calling up to the campus to report things. And I didn't even report the rest of it because of that. And then they attach who tries to do that and their family members and the people around them to fake words. So then and they force uses of people's names. In other words, these are also people involved intercity with locations with shootings. Per how they have like a DeMora family, recorded, confessed, and demonstrated, and with others on and off Trinity College and Central Connecticut CCS and Central Connecticut State University CCSU. Roles with predicate acts, identity thefts, with that involve uses of programs of each age, of all natures of them, even Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts. They have the reactions and the advertisements of people who might have been abused or whatever, real or made up. They have that recorded involved with wire crime methods, whole methods recorded in relationship to the evidence too, where they're preventing mandated law outside of courts. Joel request recorded, confessed, and demonstrated by people associated with the present wire crime acts and methods relevant to the ones in the past, on and off the campuses and on and off the Wethersfield Police Station and interbranch locations through time, relevant to their new guy. They have a new one called Sullivan. and they have confessions from another guy. I answered the phone. They said they only have a woman named Sullivan. I don't know who the woman was last time. I didn't even ask her. I'm trying to limit the names of people who are involved with the wrongdoings in the predicate acts with the interbranch locations. Now, they also recorded, confessed, and demonstrated they pretend people make allegations when they know they've been forging names and switching names and switching sequences, starting fights, and then lying about the reactions to it. They've been pretending passions and emotions in cases to hide their roles with locations crimes, leading up to and intercampuses crimes further. Now, there are also people like Sabri Bajario, I barely know him. They recorded, confessed, and demonstrated involved with Phil Cololo. There's a Phil Cololo who's one of the people that Bob Chase recorded, confessed, and demonstrated with others, is involved with him with fabricating audio and video on New Britain Superior Court. There are various Hartford courts involved leading up to the World Trade Center and since that were involved with locations crimes that were confessed and recorded other ways and demonstrated other ways after the Trade Center attack. There's an Officer Hunter involved with that, and predicate acts roles and wrongdoing roles and sequence shift roles, identity theft frauds roles on off Central Connecticut State University. And it's with a whole bunch of people from my town that I never had anything to do with. And the only exceptions in exception nature were created for them to pretend other, the same ones that have fake words attached to them. They're self-valuing that because they need to, their roles with how they use time, always too fast, too slow, to keep the Washington, D.C. and the World Trade Center syntax natures involved with this breaching method employed against the concentrated value of the intercampuses systems, intercampuses of each age and nature. So we have fire department campuses, and we have colleges and universities, and we have the child schools around them. All of them intercity connected to what is, So there's a Mike Kerr and there's a Jerry Kerr and his parent, their parents, and obviously they have their kids and they have their the corner of their street recorded, confessed, and demonstrated involved with judges. Also recorded distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously recorded, confessed, and demonstrated, both simultaneously pretending other, for example, as in relation to the sequence shifts, and with physical delusions, and attaching me and other little kids through time with roles with the rest. There are dozens of people from New Britain Superior Court and from Hartford courts that have been pretending to know me through time. All exceptions in exception nature are recorded, having been set up to pretend that through time because of the recorded, confessed, and demonstrated roles with all kinds of natures of predicate acts with evidences in cases interbranch and private and other, and roles with that from there exploited with their live progressions to all identity the ground, each age of correlation natures, actually inherent, progressive, active and progressive means. There is some stuff, there are a whole bunch of people tied to Daryl Chandler, and I heard he died, God forbid, and his sister. So now those are people that are used as victim predators, in other words. I met his sister, but this is also recorded. These are people involved on Church Street in Old Wethersfield, in the house on the corner, recorded, confessed, and demonstrated, involved with investigations, investigators, and vetting identities associated with Wethersfield parks and intercities parks, and with the intercampuses and private database relationships, vertical, horizontal, illusion stacking, and wire crime acts and methods of hiding that recorded also as evidences. But you have to follow mandated law. So what is really recorded, they have people talking about other people's emotions, but they don't follow mandated law, but they need to pretend other. So they refer to people's communities and things like that. They're forcing conversations between strangers criminally. And that's what's actually recorded. So we have all the earlier administrations used remotely from Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, involved with juxtaposed natures of organized crime. That is simple to understand as a vertical and horizontal database organized crime method used by them to prevent mandated law and to maintain the wrong outcomes in cases. Evidences are what is actually recorded shows them fabricating audio and video in cases in multi-front with the news media, with retired and standing identities of the law, identities of military, foreign and domestic in collusion on and off Central Connecticut State University, as the ones roles with the Weathersfield families, recorded, confessed, and demonstrated roles with criminally foreign influence uses of Trinity College, and of names forging and switching, and of the family members and the people in communications with deans relevant to their roles with predicate acts, and with wire crimes, and with Facebook, and with how all the emails from my AOL disappeared. I don't know how that happened. But that was also some. We have former director of the FBI and his lawyer, Robert Chevrolet, is his lawyer, one of the ones relevant. And former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, former standing chairperson on Racketeering Influence and Corrupt Organization Act. He's also roles with these crimes recorded with these other nations, with the same groups, that I only know in context where there were, like, in other words, there's a woman that when she was a kid was confessed, recorded, demonstrated, confirmed roles with an Eric Oliveri, who I don't know. And then I had a class with him. I never had anything to do with him in the class. Like, in other words, nothing like good or bad. You know what I mean? And in other words, he had roles with people involved with federal criminals that were proven after I got out of high school, but they were involved with more natures of organized crime acts, and with vertical and horizontal database organized crime, with people on and off the state judicial branch offices and locations around that, and tied to people involved with conversations in and out of the World Trade Center, in and out of the Ninth Circuit Court right next to it, and in and out of Washington, D.C., interstates tied to what is manifest on and off campuses. Now there were a whole bunch of people, like doctors in a Leahy family, and with a Dr. Dingleberry and with a Dr. Dewberry, that are recorded, confessed. And these people I don't know. And there's one of them, a Dingleberry or a Dewberry, who's confirmed, in other words, involved with a whole bunch of Weathersfield police and medical families, foreign and domestic, involved with untimely deaths, and with the context they used to hide their roles with lie progressions, with identity thefts and frauds, and crime methods that involve uses of them pretending to perceive people to be prejudiced as people they approach, in collusion with actually recorded to use to cover up lie progressions, whether they realize it or not. That's why it's important to have mandated law followed, and to have means to counter what is going against black people but pretending to be for them at the same time, offensively, because there are rules with that which keeps to all locations, areas, and states preventing mandated law, therefore simultaneously preventing logic and treatments of positive and negative that aren't self-valued and criminal insidiousness natures of positive and of negative and of defenses of that. Because that is what is maintained collusion with delusions that non-discernment of are used to maintain the opposite of evolution, so negative value, nature, progressions, acts, and natures. Self-value blamed on other things other than selves. Self-value that as identities of law, of opinion natures A through Z, of conviction natures A through Z. Nations A1 through Z, hundreds of nations. How many are Z too? A through Z. Humanity is an identity of negative value, nature, progression. It forgot not by accident. It was tactically made by a predicate acts delivery system to forget and to defend other as a criminally foreign influenced value nature systems, roles, system, style of fact treatment nature in relationship to the one nature that is nature as value / value as nature, where and how it is value, distinctly and non-distinctly from all other values, non-distinctly per where and how it is an identity of volume as value as nature / nature as value, invisible but still discernible. It's a learnable heed. Campus Marcius calls you through the read. So, the agencies and the interbranch are recorded various ways. In other words, self-valuing and influencing takes on. They're making companies as victims. Victim companies make policies in reaction as effect nature, as criminal and seditious nature, per hierarchy of it. And so now we have that hierarchy where originally and still there are other forms of police that are involved, and there are the branches, individual grouped and together, used remotely per how they hide it, per how that is maintained, needed by them by the predicate acts delivery system method that recorded effectively most furthers overt criminal enterprises. All exceptions in exception nature are in demonstration of this also. So we have the phenomenon of means of sometimes that's why the worst, we have the phenomenon of the same people further involved with child abuses, with uses of one town's interbranch families, intermilitary families, originally still criminally foreign influenced, roles with this vertical horizontal database racketeering method, worse than war crimes. Simple method. So, for example, we need to get the names. They keep the people from knowing the names, too. And I never had a conversation with Charlie Bowes in my life. There were a whole bunch of people tied to Charlie Bowes who was recorded, confessed, and demonstrated by the people mentioned by Wethersfield police. They said a Cololo family. I don't think they specified the name, which one was they were referring to specifically. Because these are people like an Officer Sullivan who didn't give his full name, and they've been forging and switching names. They have another officer involved with that and other natures of organized crime. Acts like extortion and like breaking into my house, rules crimes, forging, switching names, saying simultaneously, and attaching me and my family members to fake words with each other and with them. Now, 3 times they prevented me from making the reason I forced them to come through someone else is so when I got to my chance to speak, because they've been doing that first. That's part of what is recorded and confessed involved with the child abuses, which is way worse. There are juxtaposed natures of organized crime that are not the right to lie. Well, how could you know that? You know about these statutes. Because they've been fabricating audio and video in cases. And they've been refusing to follow mandated law. And they've been pretending passions and emotions outside of courts so they could keep doing that further and further into on-off interbranch locations. They're also involved with gun crimes and threats on my street through time. And fact treatment nature rolls with that, as rolls with juxtaposed natures of organized crime, with judges and prosecutors and their family members that an ILO family is involved with, and with identity thefts, frauds, child abuses, as person involved with locations on off Buckley High School, and with people on off Wethersfield schools, involved with predicate acts, with roles with that, where we are a fact treatment nature as a value progression. This anticipates where people are going to go. This makes this self-value. We have the identities of the law. We have how they speak good or bad about kids in collusion. They're making up things about kids into databases through people that are just supposed to listen. This person's guidance counselor, wherever, they're having fake illusions stacked into databases. In conjunction with uses of that. So there are two Mendez police that are involved with Hartford locations and Wethersfield interbranch locations with predicate acts and roles with a whole bunch of names tied to them and their predicate acts and their roles with Facebook crimes and time treatments where they try to make people that they know are telling the truth look like they're lying. That's what's recorded. So we have to have them forging and switching names, those methods and stuff like that, responded to. They have to pick one name in sequence. They've been reusing their locations per their roles with syntax that is Washington, D.C. and World Trade Center influenced. So there are a whole bunch of people tied to House/S on my street in my area and tied to them and to their extended family members, involved with a whole bunch of natures of juxtaposed organized crime, not which is on the records, not which is legitimately hid. That are roles with them. They can't put anything into paper because those are people that they're pretending they know me. They make confessions by making statements, by everyone speaking through other people. Now this is relevant to a Anna Dillon and to a Kevin Dillon, recorded, confessed, and demonstrated, involved with a whole bunch of people like a Rob Rodriguez with FBI, with a whole bunch of FBI, CIA families. And per the evidences of, don't forget, them preventing mandated law, pretending they don't understand people. Like this Officer Sullivan calling here and saying not to use the name Cololo. When the people with the Bob Chase with New Britain Superior Court, he pretended other afterwards. But what he said to me was what he confessed to me. He wouldn't show me a police report. He said had a Phil Cololo associated with it. Now they also used the name Christine. They didn't tell the whole name. These are also people recorded, confessed, and demonstrated involved with sequence shifts, identity thefts, and frauds, with people on the child sex offender registry and further involved with them, with other natures of organized crime, with drugs, and with foreign and domestic, where how they have on and off the Wethersfield Library, involved with Afghan families, involved with and people associated with the Smith family, with Stop and Shops, and with Brian Bonin and others all along the street that go Route 3 that goes along by the State Judicial Branch offices, which is right down the street from the Eric Oliveri, Craig Oliveri, that are confessed and recorded involved with predicate acts on and off Central Trinity College, with the same people that are involved with predicate acts on and off Central Connecticut State University, and in various natures of cases that had nothing to do with me. You know, there are ways, you know, where it has to do with everyone. There are evidences. In other words, they're involved with various natures of identity thefts in relationship to how they've been fabricating audio and video, in relationship to their roles with such predicate act covered up and self-valued, with locations off the campuses. Like off Central Connecticut State University has people that work with prisons and that train the prisons and that train the state police and the Connecticut police, that have their family members recorded how maintained, needed to hide roles with criminally foreign influence database tied, but identity ground, fact cheating nature involved roles. Everyone speaking from the background with the investigators and vetting identities, interbranch locations and identities and their family members and their neighbors used by this method that keeps them, everyone's what they heard, but keeps the hierarchy of what is legitimate information and what is not criminally foreign influenced. So Trinity College has, like, there are two people with the name Joey Quest, also recorded, confessed, and demonstrated involved with the federal criminals of various natures, other nations, involved with former director of the FBI's co-defendants, with the news media, involved with predicate acts with them, identity thefts, frauds, slanders, whole fake tachimita, fake locations, and that's where they broadcast. Purposely, categorically, because they have interbranch family members, dozens of people from the Britain Superior Court that are involved with predicate acts in Washington, D.C. and the World Trade Center further tied to this, and sequence shifts and other natures of wrongdoing. That's what's actually recorded, but you have to follow mandated law. You have to follow it for Wethersfield Police and Wethersfield interlocations in the background with them. They have a guy named Potter also involved with them. I never had a problem in my life with Mr. Potter. Also a recorded confess that demonstrated they tied that to a Pandolf family. I never had anything to do with them outside of campus. The only exception, he called me out of nowhere to go to a boxing gym. And, you know, these are also people recorded, confessed, and demonstrated they use the people that didn't go to my school, that went to private schools, that are involved with interbranch police and their family members, used by this, what is recorded evidence. Then they use their sense and sensibilities, in other words, where they're involved with their narratives in the background. And their uses of lawyers also involved with recorded original and still physical delusions and criminally foreign influenced fact treatment nature methods and quality of premises treatments and methods of getting away with that perpetually. Self-value, that's what's actually recorded. Follow mandated law for all the lawyers involved who can't put anything in writing on sequence, so they're hiding and plotting further since before the World Trade Center attack. Hartford courts, their family members, their employees, their family members were recorded, confessed, and demonstrated, confirmed, involved with predicate acts on off the campus of each age and nature connected. So respond for them. And so they filmed some kind. That's why they filmed something. They probably filmed me in front near Eric Oliveri and old Matt Olson and Eric Olson outside years ago when I was in high school outside of Trinity College. That was involved with them pretending to know me and pretend to other if I would discredit me if I say I don't know them. These are people I never had conversations with. So they tried to make exceptions in exception nature to pretend to be other. With the group involved with a Joe DeMoro and with a Heather Hansen and with the woman I don't know the name of from my town on Trinity College. That they recorded, confessed them. They made all these confessions about her. And she demonstrated true by her confessions in the form of statements when I was a kid. Now these are people involved with predicate acts all along Church Street per how they're using people's sense and sensibilities. If you say it to them like that, they'll say, well, I don't know them. If you say other, they'll say they know me. This is because of how the judges and the executive branch has already used criminally foreign influence. They already need to hide things from correlation nature, what are actually recorded. They need to pretend other, so they've been roles with locations crimes, interbranch locations too, like this Officer Sullivan with the names forging and switching and confessions. One guy said that they implied they only have a female Sullivan. Wasn't sure if it was clear if they have a male Sullivan or not. We need the last name of the other Sullivan. There's also an Officer Poisian who's recorded, confessed, and demonstrated by other officers, and demonstrated by himself with physical delusions too. But roles with a principal sex offenders campus, further to enforcing his crimes and physical delusions, forced that. And now he's involved with wire crimes that involved also email, fabricating audio and video on off interbranch locations, and fabricating audio and video and fake email. And then where and how my email on AOL went away. And if I'm going to have to use the name of the, I don't know, in other words, they They use investigators and vetting identities to make up things into databases, including with doctors fabricating little kids and adults and their family members, fake locations, fake ties to doctors, fake natures of ties to people, fake ties to complete strangers. So like this Joshua Julian is a complete stranger. That I know that name only because it was repeated to me a bunch of times from my neighbor, a Colello, who's involved with this Sullivan, who called my house, like a punk, and not giving his full name, like a little kid too. Involved a whole bunch of other Sullivans are involved with sequence shifts, identity thefts, and frauds on Park Street, who are also involved with the Maggie and Elena Davenport. I don't know what her new name is, and a whole bunch of people with courts involved with them, with Washington D.C. and with World Trade Center rules. Now, there's nothing personal, Elena. This is how they're keeping the black community used. We are organized. This is the identity of the organization. And to say what? To stay defenses of fact-cheaping nature styles that are preventing sequence shift true, that are preventing finite true. Now, I don't know. These are also people that have a pattern of confessions as strangers, where they make a whole bunch of confessions at once that are all connected to everyone speaking through other people. They have ties to a DeMoro family, and they have ties to a shopping center where a Lowe's is. And since it was before that was Lowe's. But they have the policing of the area, that's like the middle of the part of the Berlin Turnpike. And those are people involved with all three locations at the end of the Berlin Turnpike. Recorded, confessed, and demonstrated, also involved with roles, with clicks, with predicate acts on and off the locations of downtown Hartford and of the buildings next to and on and as the building of Fox Connecticut News. No, right before Hartford, Connecticut, as victims, effectively maintain victim predators, everyone, and pretending that's personal when they say that. After they steal your identity, they pretend that they take offense when you say, "Oh, I didn't say that." I never had that relationship to a doctor. See, we have people on and off Trinity College that can't defend what they want to pretend on paper because of how they use that woman and the DeMoro family and the Oliveri family for what also reportedly effectively used remotely and uses remotely the Obama administration, earlier administrations, our administrations, because they have states, locations, areas, defenses of, treatments of, sequence, finite, active, progressive, and identities, value. They can't defend that and afford the science by values actual system /S. I tell best boxings. I tell you things. So by not just delaying the news, their roles with stacking and valuing stacked more and more, both databases oriented and locations oriented illusions that are in collusion against each individual of correlation nature. Each individual identity of correlation nature has the identity that is the simultaneous value of the surface values of the Constitution, regardless what order they are in. Like free speech. Regardless if you know that is the name of what amendment that is. See, we have knowledge used all ways. Too fast, too slow. To get over on forever nature and the quality of fact-cheaping nature. Capable as we are going to be through this science /S, where we do not separate, where we have to separate subjects. We don't leave out exception nature, and where and how subjects share an identity, and as an identity of value progression, where there's also an increasing identity of volume. /S, individual grouped and together, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, which is part of the science. So if you don't think that, if you think that we had criminal insidiousness nature, propagation, we had obligations for our legal identities,